Welcome to Monograph Matters. I'm talking today with Bill Fabricius, lead author of the SRCD Monograph on Perceptual Access Reasoning in Developing a Representational Theory of Mind. This discussion addresses new insights about the developmental progression of theory of mind. Why is it so important that we get this developmental story right about how children understand the mind? What implications has your new approach yielded about how and when children develop this insight?
In chapter 9 of the monograph, we report a finding about 6-year-old children who were asked by their kindergarten teachers to rate how well adjusted these children were to formal schooling, their kindergarten adjustment. When we assess these 6-year-olds in terms of whether they were using perceptual access reasoning or understanding mental representations, only about half of the 6-year-olds had moved past PAR into an understanding of mental representations. And those were the children that the teachers said were better adjusted to formal schooling. Just by using the false belief test, we would never see those two groups of 6-year-olds, the PAR users versus the belief reasoners. We wouldn't be able to understand why half of them were impressing their kindergarten teachers as ready for formal schooling. We know how important teachers' initial evaluations are of children's readiness and adaptability to school, because those initial judgments have long-term import for children's further schooling. So it's just in that one area, it's incredibly important that we understand why some children are delayed or why some are more advanced in understanding mental representation. We also see this play out in early adolescence, where the field has developed some measures of what we call advanced theory of mind that are appropriate for middle childhood and early adolescence. We don't know a whole lot about how these tasks work. We don't know a whole lot about the further developments in understanding the mind after middle childhood and adolescence, but adolescents' responses on these advanced theory of mind tasks relate to their social adjustment in ways that are really important in adolescence in terms of peer acceptance or rejection, things related to peer acceptance and rejection. So it's so important for us to get the developmental story right about how children develop this abstract understanding of mental representations. And then in adolescence, we think the important thing there is how they understand not only that the mind represents things, but that two different minds can interpret the very same thing differently. We're not really asking that question now. We tend to think in the field that most of what children need to learn about the mind is learned by 5 or 6 years of age when they understand false beliefs. We really need to open up the field, open up the theoretical questions, really assess how children develop the concept of mental representation, and then I believe later be able to understand how adolescents develop the concept of mental interpretation. It's just so important in so many areas for children to understand that two people can legitimately and seriously interpret the same thing differently, with neither one of them being inherently more right than the other.
What about the other end of the developmental spectrum? Much research these days is continually finding an innate understanding of the mind in younger and younger children. What do you think are the risks in communicating this research to the public?
Well, if we're overestimating infants and toddlers' ability to understand that people have false beliefs, that they have mental representations, then, if we're overestimating that, then the risk is that when these research findings filter down to the public through press reports, which are very frequently, given about, exciting new, surprising findings about infants' understanding of the mind, it can feed into a unrealistic expectation on parents' parts that infants can read their minds, that infants can act with intent toward their parents, and parents could then misinterpret an infant's natural fussiness as somehow intentionally aimed at the parents. And we know from decades of research that developmentally inappropriate, unrealistic expectations of infants' behavior and understanding is a real risk factor for child abuse. So it's very important that we get the developmental story right and that we are very careful about portraying not only infants and toddlers, but young children, young school-age children, as more competent in their understanding of the mind than they may be, because unrealistic developmental expectations at all ages are sources of risk for children.
Read more about this topic in the monograph issue, Perceptual Access Reasoning in Developing a Representational Theory of Mind, by Fabricius, Gonzales, Pesch, Weimer, Puglisi, Carroll, Bolnick, Kupfer, Eisenberg, and Spinrad. If you liked this video, consider watching our Monograph Matters playlist. For additional resources related to this and other issues of the monographs of the Society for Research in Child Development, please visit monographmatters.srcd.org.